Welcome to Between the Covers, the show for readers and writers and lovers of books. I'm Stephanie, and I'm a publisher at Red Penguin Books, where we publish books of all types and genres. So whether you have a manuscript all ready to go, a book still stuck in your head, or maybe even 500 sheets of loose leaf shoved in a drawer. And yes, probably once a month, I do receive a packet of loose leaf. Please visit us at redpenguinbooks.com and unleash your inner author. I'm so excited to be joined by some authors who have undoubtedly unleashed themselves. Our first author today is Felice Zaslow. She's the author of From Here, Lessons in Love and Loss from 9/11. And our author writes, Felice and Ira Zaslow's love story spanned almost 4 decades, from the beaches of Far Rockaway to a comfortable suburban existence on the South Shore of Long Island. She taught 6th grade at the local middle school while he commuted daily to Lehman Brothers in the World Trade Center. As their sons grew up, they appreciated each day, looking forward to more time as a couple. Then came the morning of September 11th, 2001. Through the days, weeks, and months that followed, Felice had to find her way through unfathomable trauma on a path she had to forge herself, seeking guidance and role models along the way. This remarkable and inspiring memoir puts a very personal face on a national tragedy, facing down darkness by looking for the light that is always present. Please welcome guest Felice Zaslow. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
Oh, I can't imagine the pain of your loss, but also of writing and how that must have been, I'm guessing both cathartic in one way, but absolutely heartbreaking in another. Can you take it back?
Yes, that would describe it. This book has had a 19-year gestation period and about a 3 to 4 month hard labor this past summer. Yeah.
That's longer than even an elephant.
So my book opens up, there's a little glimmer of me as a child and then as a 16-year-old, and it moves forward to right before 9/11. And I finished it in 2003. So at that point, and I was always a person who wrote and kept journals, and I had 7 journals filled.
Wow.
And I said, well, I have to do this. This is how I'm going to continue my relationship with my husband for now. And I wanted to continue his love in the world. And that was where I was at that point. But I was not in any good shape to do that. I needed to live, experience life, rebuild my life. I didn't want to put myself out there as the 9/11 widow who wrote a book, you know. And so I know I made the right choice, and the whole experience cracked me wide open, and I went on a great soul-searching journey after writing that first manuscript and completing it in 2003. And then over the years, things happened that made me think my book was as relevant all through the years as ever. And it took me up to the now with these terrible, I would watch these families whose loved ones were victims of school shootings or mismanagement of a COVID era that we're in, or wars. And I had to share my experience because I did get through. I was a pioneer as a widow and a pioneer in dealing with this type of sudden tragic loss. So I got to work. I made the right connection, which eventually led me to you. And here I am, and I published the book about a week ago. And I'm thrilled. I'm getting wonderful feedback. And now I'm distanced enough from the pain to be able to share my story. And it's my deepest wish that it brings hope to others who might find themselves going through a really dark night of the soul.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you said what you did about what's happening now in the world. What happened 9/11, unfathomable. Just
Mhm.
but your words and your hope and the way you've rebuilt is as relevant today as it was all those years ago. And you said that it was now that you have the distance. Tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about that, because you wrote, it seems, right away. While the hurt was still just ripped from your heart, that's when you wrote. But now you have the benefit of distance and time.
Yes. Well, going through it back then, everything was so fresh, and I don't know that you could even consider it a memoir because it was so recent, the event. Now it's truly a memoir, and the happy times and the positive things that came out of it are most prominent in my mind, and I want to share that,
Oh, that's
and
wonderful.
I know it will be helpful. Yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely, it will be helpful because, like you said, people are going through these kinds of traumas, unfortunately, on much more of a regular basis now, aren't they?
absolutely. Unfortunately.
Absolutely. Tell me
So,
something. You
yeah.
you wrote the book in the freshness of your pain, and I'm guessing then some time elapsed and you read it again when you know and read it and reread it, because authors have to, with all the edits and such. Was it like ripping a band-aid every time, or did it get better?
Um, I finished it. I gave it to various people to read, some very famous people who gave me good life advice and good writing and publishing advice. Um, and I don't know, I was propelled to share it in whatever way I could. It eventually, somewhere in between, I I eventually handed it over to the 9/11 Memorial Museum,
Oh,
and they can share an excerpt or two as needed. And then I decided it needed some revision.
wow.
And at the advice of Rabbi Harold Kushner, who I pretty much stalked and hunted down where he was speaking at a spa in Arizona. He said, I would have counseled you to do exactly what you did if had I known you after 9/11, but I think you should publish your book your way so you don't have to alter your story,
Mm,
because he had an extremely painful story of his own involving the loss, the illness and the loss of a child. And he said, in order to make it saleable, I had to, stick to this framework. You don't have that need to do
those
that.
are very wise words of his. He had
Mhm.
had the experience then of having constraints put on him and boundaries to his story, and he didn't want you to be silenced.
Correct.
Interesting. I had no idea that that had happened with his own publishing quest, shall we say.
Yes. Yes. Well, he's quite prolific and he went on to write other books. I hope I will be somewhat prolific at least. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Tell me about the writing process. This was your first book. Um, had you been a journaler? You were mentioning journaling, but how about when you were a girl, when you were younger? Was that a thing you did, or was this pouring your
Um,
guts out at different?
I love to make up stories. I was the oldest grandchild on both sides of the family, and they throw me in a room with all the other kids, and I entertain them for a while. And some of my cousins on my father's side remember me making up great stories. And then they got older, they didn't believe them. But I was somewhat of a storyteller, and I loved to write. And I had a fifth grade teacher who encouraged me. He really zoned in on the talents, the abilities, the strengths of all of his students. In fact, he's one of the reasons I became a teacher. I adored how he was with everyone in the class. And um, he kept encouraging me to write. And so the following year, I wrote an essay that and it's in the front of my book. And it's so naive and innocent through the eyes of a young girl who felt so safe in her country. And it's entitled What America Means to Me. And I got a medal, along with many other children in the nation, from JFK or his secretary or whatever. Um, for Americanism and patriotism. And my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Uni, I can't believe he came up now.
Wow.
Wherever you are, I don't know if he's still alive or not, wrote in my autograph book, dated until Felice becomes America's #1 author. And he followed me along the next year, and it stayed with me. And I was an English major in college, became a teacher. I just always enjoyed writing. So those 7 journals, and they were journals like this, notebooks.
Right, right.
One of my former students was a very brilliant child and a brilliant writer. And his father was a writer. And he said, my dad will help you put it in a book form, because I had no experience with that. And he did. So he's in my acknowledgements as well.
Oh my gosh, what a journey this was. I had
Uh,
no idea that you were going to get to bring up your 5th grade teacher. I love that.
Neither did I.
I absolutely adore shout outs to teachers, especially because our next guest is a teacher himself. So when we get to him, I hope he's patting himself on the back on behalf of teachers everywhere. That's for sure.
May I mention another teacher
Please do.
who actually she grew up to be a teacher and a writer, and she is my former student. And she read my manuscript in recent years and made some suggested edits that were spot on. So she's also in my acknowledgements. Yes.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm so proud of her. She
She-
published a novel too.
So she
Yeah.
was a student.
Yeah.
And now, and a student of yours, and now has gone on to be a novelist and got to read your book and give you some feedback on it too.
Absolutely. We had a true role reversal.
Oh my gosh. That is so amazing. So tell me something. What is next for you? I know this book just got released. So what are your plans on this rollout? Are you going to be speaking in different groups? What are you hoping? Even if you
I am planning, yes, planning to, I already have 2 speaking engagements with dates. Actually, this was one. And 2 speaking engagements where the dates have to be firmed up, and a possible virtual book tour I'm thinking about. And then I have friends in other states who like me to speak at their organizations. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I want to, but not just for the pleasure of doing it, but it's so important for me to share my story. And I always told my family, I can't leave this planet until this story is out there. So it is now, and mushrooming.
It's out there and it's mushrooming, and we want everybody to be able to grab a copy, whether or not you were personally affected, as so many of us were, by the events of 9/11, or as Felice shared, so many people are dealing with trauma in their lives. From Here by Felice Zaslow, Lessons in Love and Loss from 9/11. Our next guest, as I mentioned, is a teacher. Dr. Christopher Saludi wrote The College Admission, Life Hacks for the Process from Application to Graduation. Certainly something we all need to read. Please welcome Dr. Christopher Saludi. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Stephanie, how are you doing?
Very good, thanks. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love this life hacks from application to graduation. This is much more than just, how to fill out an application the right way, isn't it?
You know, it's funny that you mentioned the life hacks part. So I actually got this idea from a mentor of mine. He is a mathematician, and a lot of what he discusses in his books are these hack type of things. And he said, life hacks are big. You should definitely talk about life hacks. But we're really just calling tips and hints and guides and information now life hacks, right? You watch cooking shows and they're like, oh, here's a life hack, pop it in the microwave. And I'm like, is that a life hack, or is that just what we're doing now? But it is, I think with so much information out there, and I'm going to sound like an old biddy for a second. I think generations below me don't know which information to keep and which to hold on to. And so I think these kind of hacks are a good understanding of what you should hold on to throughout the process, what kinds of things you should pay attention to.
That makes perfect sense. And tell us, just for all of our listeners, a little bit about your background. I know your background, but a little bit, how you got to be the one who knows the hacks. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. So what you're going to find in the book is a lot of success stories and failures. And I actually, on purpose, like to talk about a lot of my failures. And the reason that I do that is one of my favorite quotes from Michael Jordan. They asked him, how did you get to be in that position where you were taking that winning shot all the time? And he's like, all the time. I missed that winning shot like 115 out of 500 times. So the amount of times you saw me successful was because of the failures. And I also missed that shot 10,000 times in practice. So I went to school at Siena College for my bachelor's degree. And my father, one of the smartest men I've ever known, but formal school was not for him. It barely got through high school, but just a brilliant guy. I mean, ran his own business, did the payroll, did all these different things, knows people really well. And so as a first generation American, which is what he was, or I think he might be second because my grandmother was barely born here, he didn't know what to do, what to tell me. And so I kind of went with the school that felt right. And then I got my master's degree at a school that my mom worked at because I got a discount. And then I got my PhD at a place where I could still work because I didn't want to go from making $100,000 to getting a PhD stipend. And I got some education degrees and I got all these other certifications and I became a lifelong learner. And throughout that process, I thought to myself, God, I have made a lot of mistakes. I've made a ton of mistakes. At one point, I was the head or founder of 22 different clubs on campus. And people are like, wow, what a great statistic. Do you know how spread thin I was? Do you know how many organizations wanted to kick me off campus because of what I did, right? So from there, I went on and I had a really great career. I made some really great decisions. I made some really poor decisions, right? Hindsight's 2020. I made some good money. I made some years where I was crying. And then after about almost 10 years of that, I went and I became an academic and I became a professor and I became an assistant dean and then a dean of a couple of universities. And what I found through that process was the same mistakes that I was making were still being made, and worse mistakes and better mistakes and all sorts of mistakes being made on one end. And on the other end, we're in this situation in higher education where you really do need to read the fine print and know where you're going and know who the players are, because there are so many schools out there that are just going to promise you the world, and you need to take your career and your life into your own hands. And I think that a lot of folks look at college as 4 years of fun, and it should be some fun. But if you do it right and you plan your 4 years properly and you really study and you do what you're supposed to do career-wise, your next 40 years could be a lot more fun because you've actually taken the time to give back to yourself. So that's kind of what this book shows you.
I love your humility of owning up to your mistakes and publishing them. I mean, that's but the other thing I love is the way you freely admit you've made some good decisions and had great things happen, and you've made some really poor decisions and bad things happen. But you're sitting here. You're sitting here with a new book, and I think what an inspiration you are to all of those people. We all make mistakes, and you're sitting here saying, "Yeah, I made some really big doozies, man," and yet here you are, and that's just phenomenal. I also want to grab onto one of your takeaways. I have a child who just started college, and of course he looks at it like, well, these are supposed to be the 4 best years of my life, and it goes downhill after that. And I'm just going to play that snippet of you saying,
right,
and if you do it well, the next 40 are supposed to be, phenomenal. I mean, I love my life. I'd hate to think that I was washed up by 21. Gosh.
Right. It's so two things. So one is, I try to take the 8 Mile approach. I don't know if you've ever seen the 8 Mile movie with Eminem. So it's kind of it's a loose biopic about his life. Eminem's one of the best hip hop artists in the world, and at the very end of the movie, he's about to go up against this like really good rap star, and he's this like white folks in rap back then were not really you didn't want to see a white person rapping, right? Like they really took it out on him. He lived in a trailer with his mom, and he was poor, and they beat him up, and his girlfriend left him, and all these things. And one of his buddies goes, you think they're going to bring that up during the battle? And so instead of waiting for them to do it, he just raps about how his life is in shambles, but he's still up here standing, right? And so let's talk about these failures. Let's talk about what we've done in our lives that may or may not have been the best decisions, but we're still here and we're still pushing. Everyone thinks that their trajectory is this way, and so did I when I was 24. But you're going to hit these bumps, right? And it's okay, because the paths are going to bring you to other places. And to your end, what you said about, making the best 40 years, if you focus, right, and you take care of what you're supposed to take care of, if your back's hurting, if you're not feeling good nutrition wise, if you need to go to a therapist because you got some things in your brain, if you take care of what you're supposed to take care of in college and then afterwards, the rest of your life's going to flow. But if you just go out and have fun, and just have fun 7 days a week, Monday's going to really stink, like really stink. There's a lot of folks who talk about that, Gary John Bishop, Gary V, whoever, Mark Cuban. They say, look, if you're begging for Friday and you hate Monday, then you're doing your weekend wrong, right? Spend your time, preparing, and whether it's prayer or meditation or your finances or making your life better, so that Monday's not such a drag and Friday is not the best day in your life. Like, your whole life should be happy, but it's going to take you got to work a little bit,
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's what I love about your book is for, let's say, college or pre-college students, but actually it's for all of us, because it's about life, not just about this one specific, we're going into college and then it ends. These are life lessons. And this way we always have new beginnings. Like you were saying, we make mistakes, let's have some new beginnings.
Yeah, so it's funny, as I was preparing for this, I was just kind of reading it over, and just FYI, I don't know if I can plug this, but if you buy a copy of the book and you send me a receipt, I will send you a signed copy and or donate a copy in your name to an educator or a guidance counselor. So I have a couple of copies that I'm sending out this weekend. And so I was looking at the book, and I thought to myself, shoot, I mean, like 7 out of 10 of these chapters you can probably just put into a different book and call it like life admissions. You know what I mean? Like, and so even if you're not an early career person, or even if you're somebody who's taking a fresh start, it's a great book to just kind of talk about people in life that have learned some lessons. There's one lesson in there, I won't say it because you got to buy the book, but I remember listening to this life lesson. So when I was in college, somebody made me read The Millionaire Next Door, and this is kind of off of that book. And I met a mentor years later who reinforced it. And by then I knew the lesson. But in The Millionaire Next Door, they talk about most folks who are millionaires don't earn $1 million a year. They earn pretty good money, but they save money. They don't buy expensive suits. They don't buy expensive cars. And I remember thinking to myself, what a crock. What's the use of being a millionaire if you can't just like live it up, like later in life is when I realized the use is that when you're 55, you can probably say goodbye and live your dream, maybe whether it's writing or whatever. So anyway, there's a person in this book who did very well for himself, but part of it was the way he spent and saved his money. And you don't need to be 20 or 16 to learn that lesson. I mean, I'm 37 and I'm still learning that lesson. So, these are great lessons to be had no matter who you are. And they're not just for me. There's a lot of very, very successful, from my students to my mentors to my colleagues to really successful people. You can Google these folks and they're up there.
I think that's fabulous. It's funny how your book and Felice's book on the surface are completely different, yet they're actually two halves of the same coin, aren't they?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
Sure. In Felice's case, life kind of poured, lemons all over her, and
Yep.
she had to, find her way out, and subsequently has learned by amalgamation all of these life lessons. And you, as you said, made some poor choices, and now want to share that. Both of you have that aspiration to share what you've learned with others, and that's so wonderful that you want to help others rather than kind of the attitude of, I suffered, let them suffer.
Right, absolutely. And I think if nothing more, I'm not a 20-year-old kid, so I don't know how 20-year-olds think anymore, but I wasn't too far away. And I would imagine that they hear us so many times say, well, you got to do it this way, you got to do it that way. And I think one of the things that still makes me relatable as a professor is I'm still learning, and I'm still messing those things up all the time, and I'm not too far away, right? And so when they hear us, and even Felice's story too, when they hear us say, it's not just that I want you to do it this way. Let me tell you a story about how it was done a different way. And this was the outcome. And if you run this game about 1,000 times, 900 times, it's probably going to come out that way too. So let's learn from these, you know, if history does nothing more, it's to teach us how to not make that mistake again, or how to grieve properly, or how to love properly, how to live properly. So let's learn from the folks who have been there, because they suffered for us to not make that mistake again.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes. And Felice, that's exactly what you were saying with your book.
Agreed. And a comment about your book, Christopher.
Thank you.
I have a grandson who's a high school senior who could really benefit from that. And I'm over it.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you what, if you buy him a
Perfect.
if you buy him a copy, what I do is, if you buy him a copy, I just send me a note. I will send him a signed copy with a personalized note, and he can give his book to a guidance counselor or to somebody else who wants it.
I think
Okay,
that's
great.
fabulous.
You got it.
And so great to be sharing the wealth of experience here. So both of you have had life lessons, but I want to talk to you a little bit about your writer lessons, because yes, you have so much that in your book you're imparting to others about life. But for our future authors out there, for people who want to write, because statistically they say that 90% of the people polled want to write a book. 90%. So that means that most people, if you walk down the street, and if you had a t-shirt that said I'm an author, and you should get one.
I will.
You two represent like success. You did it, and everybody else wants to do it. So let's talk for a moment about those lessons. Felice, what would you say if there was a new author, or you are actually speaking to 90% of the population here? How did you?
Okay. Hello, population, 90% of you. I would say start writing. Start writing, collect your thoughts on paper, and then start writing your story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, and believe in yourself. If this is a story that's important for you to share, keep at it. All right. I had a big gap in between, and I revised it, and I'm in a different place in life, and that can happen too, but that can happen much sooner for someone else. But keep working on it. And then once I had that story down pat, I proofed and I reproofed and I reproofed, and I got a couple of eagle-eyed people. My daughter-in-law found some things, a proofreader, the editor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And read it again in a calm moment and see if there's something else, maybe a nuance or something you want to change, but never give up.
Fantastic.
It's important.
Yeah, just like Nike, just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it. Christopher, how about you? What would you tell our future writers?
Thank you. So I would break it down into, if you read my book, Rule of Three. The three things that I would say. Number one is, let's talk about a mistake. I was an arrogant writer in college, and I talked to an author, a published author, and I led my question with, because I was interviewing from our literary magazine, and I said, when you're binge writing, and he said, I don't binge write. And I said, well, but all artists binge write. How do you write? And he said, no, all artists do not binge write. He said, most writers write every day. The same way a musician makes it their business to make music, and an artist makes it their business to make art, you do it every day. He said, I write about 20 to 30 minutes a day max, and then I'm done. And then I go and I do the rest. And as I progress my career, I'll be able to write more, because I'll be able to sell more books. And I didn't believe him. And I binge write, and I churn out 4 chapters in a day, and then I don't touch the book for a month. And that's how it went. Write every day. Write every single day like it's your job, because you love to do it. Do it before you start work, because by the time you're done with work, you're going to be exhausted, right? And then stop. One thing that writers don't do is they don't stop, and they continue to write. And then the next day they go, oh, where do I go now? No, stop in the middle of a thought, because tomorrow you're going to have that thought again. It's going to be still there, right? So continue that thought. I'd say that's number one. Number two, not all writing days are writing, right? Sometimes if you're writing a fiction book, or even a nonfiction book, it's doing an interview, it's researching a place that is in your book. That's, if it's a fiction book, it's those types of things. And then third is, if you are writing a fiction book, which my next book will be fiction, that's coming out, even if you're not including it in the book, I like to put my character into certain situations to get a feel for who they are. So character walks down the street, they find a bag of $20,000. What are they doing? Are they looking around and taking it? Are they bringing it to the police department? They have a big game coming up, and whatever, they're in high school, they have a big sports game. Are they fasting before the game because they have nerves? Do they call their girlfriend or boyfriend? Like, who do they look to for support? And what you'll find is when you get to know your character on that level, when you're writing the book, you're going to know them so much better. So those are the three things that I would say.
Oh, I love that. I think that that's fabulous. And
Thank you.
so right about doing it a little bit every day. I heard a quote, I think it was Hemingway, who said that when he finishes his writing, just like you were saying, he doesn't stop at the end of a chapter or even the end of a line. He stops mid-sentence.
That's
This
cool.
way, when he comes back the next day, so many people, like you say, Christopher, like, what should I write about today? No, you're like right there in the thick of it. So it just kind of went off the flow. What about now? I'm a bright side person. I'm always a bright side person, but I'm guessing that in the writing of the book, there was at least something that went wrong or something that maybe that surprised you in a, I didn't expect that kind of a thing. Christopher, anything go? What was the
Absolutely.
worst
I
thing
mean,
that happened? Tell us
yeah.
now so we could rip the Band-Aid off.
Absolutely. So, I mean, every time I write, right, there's always something that goes wrong. When I wrote my dissertation, I remember crying one night. I just couldn't get up off the couch. I was so tired. So one of the inspirations for this book is a great mentor of mine. And when I wrote some of the lessons down that I had learned from him, I said, hey, these are the lessons I'd like to include. And he asked to not be in the book because he was just changing careers, and he had a couple of things that he didn't want his name and his title published in the book because he may not be there when the book was published. And so that was kind of a drag to not include him in the book. And so then I had to like backfill the chapter and find a new mentor and those types of things to talk about. So I just think always, if you're writing a nonfiction book or even a fiction book, just have extra ammunition.
And that makes perfect sense. And also because a book doesn't get done in like a day. So
Right.
What people say or where your life is at when you first start writing and where you're at the end might be very different. And like you mentioned, Christopher, somebody who might have been involved at the beginning, their own situation, whatever it was,
Right.
has changed. Felice, how about you? Anything terrible
Yes.
to know about?
Not terrible, but I struggled with how do I mention people who there were one or two people with whom I had a changed relationship or no relationship anymore. And they were important at that time. And that's what a memoir is. You're writing about that particular time. But one person who I thought was a friend was not. So I described her otherwise, but I struggled with it a lot. That was a tough thing. Yeah.
I hear that a lot from memoirists, that there is a struggle because you are talking about actual people and how to bring them up. You might not want to be throwing them under the bus, but you're saying some things there that I'm sure, as both of you spoke about your own failings, and that's fine. When you speak about others' failings, it gets a little rough.
Yeah, it really was not relevant because her failings became evident after 2003. But I didn't want to portray her as this wonderful friend from back then either, because that wasn't the case. We had a wolf in sheep's clothing case.
I understand.
I want to buy this book. I want to read about the wolf in sheep's clothing. I was on the website looking for it, so I'm going to buy it.
I'm going to buy yours too as soon as we get off.
Thank you so
Now, how
much.
about a positive? What's something good that was unexpected? Felice, did you have anything that was like, wow, I didn't expect it to go well with this? Or something?
Yes, it's bigger than life for me.
Oh,
After writing my book and almost having it finalized, my entire life made sense. And I saw that all the life choices I made along the way that I struggled with were right for me. And there was one person connected to an event that connected to another event, to another person, etc. It was wonderful.
oh my goodness. I love that. You came to some understanding that wasn't there
Yes.
beforehand. And going through this whole process, I always say that writing a book
your life has changed. You are not the same person when you start and when you write the end, or when you know, after it's published. You're a different person. And I hear that evolution with you in a good way, which was fabulous. Christopher, how about you? Something good that came out of it as opposed to the bad.
Absolutely. So, I mean, everyone that I got to talk to was so much fun. Learning about my friends and colleagues and students, and they, of course, were like, "Oh, you were such a big part of this." It was really heartwarming. But just like I had one mentor saying, "Hey, you know, I don't know if I want to be involved with the book," so you'll know I cheated. One of the folks in my book is my brother. And you know, like any little brother, I look up to my brother. I mean, I text him all the time, and you know, he's 5 years older than me, so sometimes we don't have stuff to talk about, right? Back when we were younger, all we did was try one because he was bigger. And so I said to him, his name's Carmine. He's in the book, and I said, Carmine, you had a really great career. My brother's the managing director of the S&P. He's a big deal, and you know, I said I would love if you would just honestly, I said I'll bump anybody. Pick any chapter that you want to be the executive in, you know, the example in. And we'll make it that easy. And he approached me and he said, no, you pick one or two chapters that would fit, and then I'll do it. And now most folks, we just like, maybe we got a drink, or we emailed back and forth, or we texted, and I had to decode and put and make it grammatically correct, and that's fine. That's what a writer does. He said to me, okay, I've got Thursday and Friday of this week for these 2 hours, and put it on my calendar, and whatever. And so we do that. And when I tell you the 2 hours, he was, first of all, in a so professional a way that I've never seen my older brother before, even though he's such a successful man, and so informative, and really, I mean, I wish I could write a whole book. I would want to include him in my next book, because he gave me so many great lessons. Again, he gave me some failures the same way I do. He gave me some humility, and he gave me some successes, and he talked to me about what it really means to work for his organization and what he looks for. And I think that when you talk to a 22-year-old or a 20-year-old or a 16-year-old, and they look at this guy, and this guy's got it all. He's got the two kids, the picket fence, the pool, the Disney timeshare. You know, he and his wife have a beautiful marriage. He's got a beautiful life. And I think when you see the ups and downs that he's gone through, and the way that he did it in such a professional way, it really was such a beautiful thing to be able to write about a family member in that way.
Oh, that's fabulous. Not to mention spending quality time with your brother.
Right, absolutely.
That is just amazing, because as we get older, those relationships and having some excuse, you're making me want to write a book so I can call up my brother and just spend some good quality time with him. That would be
absolutely
amazing. I love that. Well, let me ask you one other question for the two of you. If I were going to be buying a book right now for someone, and Christopher, I'm going to say to you, aside from the obvious, a high school senior, aside from that, if I'm buying a book right now, Christopher, who should I be buying a book for? And then Felice.
Oh, good. So my book?
Yes.
I would say, even, you know, the parents of those children going to school are great. I honestly even think, you know, in your 13 and 14 years as you're approaching high school, there are some good lessons there. Maybe you should be taking some AP classes, or start to think about what your 4 years look like, or putting away money. And even if you're, you know, a graduated college student, this economy is so weird. So I left my university about a year ago to go back to corporate. Now I still teach about half time, but now I'm back in corporate, and I work in talent assessment and talent placement. And some days it's like I can place 20 people, and then some days it's like all the positions are frozen. We're in a really weird spot in this country, and so everyone needs to really be on their game and make themselves super valuable, and make sure that they not making no mistakes, because we learn from our mistakes, but don't make the silly ones, right? Make the ones that count. And so I think anyone really can buy this book and really take a couple of lessons. If you just need one of my life coach, because I life coach as well, one of my life coaching clients said, you're like rocket fuel with some spiritual yoga. So, you know, sometimes you need the rocket fuel, and sometimes you need to rest. And so this book will really gives you a good balance of the two.
I think that's fabulous. Thank you. Felice,
you.
how about you? Who should I be buying a copy for today?
Well, you can buy Christopher's book for me. No, I'm going to buy it. I'm going to get a copy for me too. For anyone going through, struggling with a loss, or it could be a loss in the form of a serious medical situation. People are not alone. There are other ways. There's always, and I've often said this to my children when they were growing up, There's always another way to look at something, at a situation. You have to find it. Anyone who needs to know that, anyone suffering from a tragic loss, anyone who needs a role model of how to get through a tough time.
Oh,
I
fantastic.
didn't know I could be a role model, but I feel like I paved that road because there were no role models for me.
And unfortunately, you just described so many people.
Yep.
So that you can be that role model. Let me just remind all of our viewers about your books and where they can get them. From Here by Felice Zaslow, Lessons in Love and Loss from 9/11. You can go to her website at felicezaslow.com or find her where books are sold. And The College Admission, Life Hacks for the Process from Application to Graduation. Dr. Christopher Saluti has a website at christophersaluti.com, or his book is available all over. So thank you so much for joining me, and good luck with the books. And by the way, I did hear an inkling that both of you have projects planned for the future. So when that project comes to fruition, I hope to see you back here between the covers. Thanks.